and we're live to discuss the episode called Colours. And before we started this broadcast, folks, we were talking about my naming system and how inconsistent it is, but we'll get on to this episode. Or unless you want to talk a little bit about that, Jeff. I mean, it depends if people have been looking at the videos and noticing the same things as you.
No, that's all right.
Okay.
We're reviewing Homicide, Life on the Street, Season 3, Episode 19, and it is titled Colors. Very simple title. That'll help with your naming system, Ben. At least it's not, so long that it goes off the screen or whatever. Anyway, it was written by Tom Fontana and directed by Peter Medak, however you say that. Apologize for not knowing how to say his name. It aired originally April 28th, 1995. Bolander and Pembleton arrive at Bayliss's cousin's house. See, already the recap is wrong because it said Bayliss's brother, but it's actually his cousin.
Yeah.
Which is the scene of a shooting. And my webpage just reloaded, so give me just a second.
Okay.
Dead victim is an exchange student from Turkey, dressed up as a member of the band Kiss, equipped with a leather jacket and face paint. Tim's house in the middle of the investigation. Pembleton tells him he is not allowed to be at the scene. Precinct Pembleton gets information from Jim in the box, with Tim looking on. Jim goes on to tell Pembleton that he thought the exchange student was trying to rob his house and wouldn't back away, and that he shot him to protect his family. Pembleton then interviews Jim's wife, who mentions that the exchange student was speaking in a foreign language and implicates that Jim has difficulties dealing with people of other races. Later, Pembleton interviews the exchange student's friend, who clearly remembers him holding his arms up in the air, surrendering when Jim pointed his gun at him. Hearing three different stories and believing that this is something more than justifiable homicide, Pembleton and Bayliss get into an argument in G's office. Pembleton goes back in the box to grill Jim Bayliss, and when an onlooking Tim thinks the questions are getting out of hand, reversible mirror in the box to bits. In meeting with ADA Danvers, Pembleton says that he feels the shooting was racially motivated, and is that the case goes before a grand jury, much to the disappointment of Tim Bayliss. Tim notifies his brother Jim, again it's his cousin, not his brother. So Jim doesn't take the news well and lashes out with violence to an officer. Feeling the pressure when food sales in the detective's bar, Arlo fires his cook. Lewis, assigned with the task of hiring someone else to cook for them, hires his grandmother. Bolander mentions to Munch and Lewis that he doesn't know how two partners could ever work together again after something big like this, referring to Bayliss and Pembleton. When the case goes before the grand jury, they decide that Jim Bayliss was in fear of his life and is not worthy of going to trial. Bayliss asks Pembleton for an apology, but Pembleton won't bite, saying that his cousin is worse than a Klansman because his bigotry is unrecognizable. Okay, so is the end of that.
I would have challenged him on that.
That poorly written recap.
No, I would have challenged him on the fact of saying that, that's worse than a Klansman. Yeah. Yes. People who actually committed murder.
Yeah. Do you want to hear David Morris's take?
Oh, yes. Yes, David Morris.
Hopefully it's better written than that recap was. So he says, Homicide was a divergent show because it would frequently and with great power deal with the subject of race in America today. There have been some pretty powerful moments on the show, and there would be many more to come. But perhaps the most provocative one was Colors, which may be the most frightening portrayal of race problems on television today. And the reason is because of a very disturbing scene that occurs near the end of the show. In that scene, a Baltimore grand jury has just elected not to charge Jim Bayliss, a white Baltimore homeowner, for killing Hikmet Gursel, a Turkish exchange student. Danvers reads that no charges will be filed. The courtroom erupts into applause and cheers. As Frank, the man who was primer in the case, puts in these good law-abiding citizens, puts it, I think is what he meant to say, these good law-abiding citizens applauded the death of a child. He wonders what the reaction would be if Gursel had been white. He indicts Jim Bayliss and by extension everyone in the courtroom of having a racism so ingrained they were not even aware of it. This is a frightening indictment of today's society, and it lingers long after this episode is over. Even if Colors didn't have that scene, it would still rank as a very powerful episode, mainly because of the fact that the killer, from the name, is Detective Tim Bayliss's cousin. Normally, not only on TV but also real life, it would not be uncommon for a detective's partner to go easy on a friend or relative. But the primary is Frank Pembleton, perhaps the only detective in all of television who could probably remain impartial when investigating someone he knows. It also becomes clear that there is room for doubt in what happens to Gersel that night. Jim claims that he thought that Gersel, who was on his way to a heavy metal rock party and was decked out in leather and kiss makeup, was a burglar who made repeated attempts to enter his home and that he shot him only in self-defense. The first time that Jim recounts the incident to Pembleton and Bolander, in a decolorized flashback reminiscent of the show's first season, he seems absolutely shattered by the fact that he has taken another man's life. However, after Jim's wife, Shannon, and the teenager who was driving Gersel to the party tell subtly different stories about the level of tension and the threat posed, then we learn that Jim was once arrested for attacking an Arab. This convinces Pembleton that the killing seemed racially motivated. You could probably go either way on this, until Tim takes Jim back to his home and sees Gersel's blood on his front porch. Jim turns to his cousin and says, "Who'd have thought their guts would be the same color as ours," without any flinching at all. Then, when Jim is brought before a grand jury, he seems genuinely repentant and willing to go to jail for his crime. He believes he was justified, but he wishes that it hadn't happened. Usually the case with Fontana's work, the world is never painted in shades of black and white. Tim is understandably upset that his cousin is being charged, doubly so when he knows Frank is the primary. He is adamant that his cousin is a good man and not a street killer, and the idea that this is false is almost as wrenching to him as the killing itself. He and Frank have had their differences before, but never have we seen him quite so raw. In scenes, Frank begins to press Jim while Tim watches behind the one-way mirror. Every time Frank starts going over the line, Tim starts hammering on the glass, eventually completely shattering it. We also get considerable insight into Tim's character, and not all of it's pretty. When G decides to back Pembleton in pursuing his investigation, Tim accuses them of being part of the Brotherhood. Then when Frank talks to Danvers about prosecuting the crime, he is bitterly sarcastic at the fact that Frank has found another racially motivated crime. But they are troubling as we realize that Tim, like most people, has his prejudices and they color his judgment. The prosecution puts a rift between Bayliss and Pembleton, one that may never fully heal. And yet, despite his shielded work, Frank does feel for Jim Bayliss as a homeowner and a husband. During the episode, he has a discussion with Mary about security and protecting themselves. As the episode shows in a montage near the end, in many ways, Frank and Jim are two sides of the same coin. The episode's themes are discussed even when they aren't being dealt with by Frank and Tim. There are various discussions of color throughout the episode, from Bolander's opening monologue about perception of green to the discussion of color on the TV screen. Even the jokes that Lewis and Munch make about the chef at the waterfront have a vaguely offensive tone. Answers to the questions posed by colors, if indeed there are answers at all. This is difficult to watch, but when you can barely look from it. If Homicide had done only this episode on racism, it would be enough to call it groundbreaking. The amazing thing, these episodes are just another day's work for Tom Fontana. Remarkable as the episode itself. My score, 9.5. That's his take. What's yours, Ben?
Well, he's going on like no other episodes on American television talk about race when the United States is obsessed by race. And he's always talking about race.
Another thing to consider is two things. One, this episode, as I said, aired in 1995, and then that review was written in 2005. So there's been quite a bit of time for more television shows. I can't remember off the top of my head, how much it had been by 95, but it being a huge topic on most shows, and when it was sort of dealt with in the kind of very special episode kind of way, like where there's this one evil racist guy who's in this one episode, but then we never see him again. So it's like there isn't the same kind of by this episode of having somebody who's a family member, of one of the main characters, and all of that, those kind of things be brought up. So anyway,
Right. I made some notes. Yeah, I mean, they went overboard with some of the symbolism, like Bayliss. Oh, I don't want a black coffee. That kind of stuff. Do you remember that? I wanted cream in this coffee. I didn't want it black. Send it back. That sort of thing. I mean, they went overboard. I mean, repeating the theme. With,
Well, as the review kind of pointed out, I think to point out just how many subtle things there are that people don't think about. You know, that was kind of the theme of the episode, and brought in, you know, just a lot of little things. Again, Homicide's all about the details, and like you could say, I mean, you said overboard. I mean, I obviously, to give you, I don't think it was overboard. I think it was obvious in terms of they weren't making any kind of attempt to hide what was being presented to the audience. It's in a lot of ways, a very straightforward episode in its pointing out of a lot of different things that are sort of along the same theme.
Oh, also that those people in the courthouse, we were saying like the whole courthouse was cheering. Well, a lot of those would be black people as well, wouldn't they? In that. And
yeah, so it was different. You know, he talked about when he said, you know, something that wasn't even in that recap or the review, that Frank didn't just say if he was white, he said if he was American. So there was a little bit of this it wasn't necessarily as it was, you know, cultural or, you know, nationalist, if you want to put it that way. Like, you know, this kind of thing that would be contemporary again today when there's all this talk about, you know, it is saying things like America first in trade policy and stuff like that, or, you know, suspending immigration by Muslims and things like that. Are those things that are, you know, against what America stands for, or is that people taking a stand protecting the country from people that wish to do it harm? That's obviously still obviously a very hot issue in today's time. So at that time, you know, you talk about the black people in the court that were applauding. You think about Baltimore was and is majority black, so
exactly.
There's obviously going to be more people, and that those people their attitude may have still been, well, this was a foreigner and this is our city. That may have been what the attitude of those people was. So
it's
not just thinking in terms of on racial lines. Whereas if it had been a black kid from Baltimore, different scene. Like some of the themes would have been the same, but the courthouse reaction probably would have been different. The whole story would have been kind of presented in a different way. So I actually liked the fact that they made it, because it allowed some of those things to be brought up, that Pembleton's looking at it as, hey, this isn't actually just a white-black thing. This goes beyond that, you know. So.
I mean, do you really have foreign exchange students in the United States that can't speak English?
They can't speak English. I haven't encountered one that couldn't speak any English. Morgan is nodding that he has, apparently. I never met one that didn't speak some English. They weren't necessarily great at it. Oh, okay. Really. You have to have some sort of knowledge in English just to qualify for a foreign exchange student program. But
I would hope so.
Yeah, the ones I encountered, I remember the first one I can really remember when I was, that's 9 years old, I think. You don't get horribly confused about the grading system again?
I just got to remember to add 5. I got it now. Just add 5.
Okay. There was a kid from Italy, as it was a foreign exchange student. He spoke kind of scattered English, but the only most I remember about him is that of the slang. So he was trying to figure that out, and he would kind of copy what people said without truly knowing what he was saying, which got him into some trouble. In the case, in the case of this episode, I don't think at any point they ever said that he didn't speak English. The interpretation of both Jim and his wife was he wasn't speaking English when they heard him say stuff, except they heard Jim said he heard like scattered English words, and I think what that probably what they were implying from what you actually heard him say in the flashbacks was that he was saying a bunch of rock lyrics. He was saying like Kiss lyrics because he was already somewhat drunk and he was showing up at this party, and so he was kind of doing this thing where he's part of the band or something, or he's doing the lyrics from the so he may have sort of scattered in some Turkish language stuff into what he was saying, but he came off as speaking a foreign language because they couldn't understand what he was saying. Accent and was saying lyrics they didn't understand or things like that. So they never at any point that I remember said that he did speak any English. They just said he was confused, and his friend is the one who sort of testifies on his behalf in the sense that he says he'd been drinking. We thought we were going to a party. He was confused when he saw the gun, he just thought it was part of the act of the party. So he wasn't scared by it. He was his hands like he was playing along.
There was something really weird when happened with Frank in the courtroom. He starts giving theories about how he thought it was racial. And then he was talking about he must have thought it was a toy gun. Surely that's very unprofessional, not to just give him the facts, and he's coming up with all of this stuff trying to sway the jury. So maybe that should have been.
Yeah, and I'm not sure because obviously grand jury proceedings are different than like a criminal trial, so I don't know to what extent counsel has the power to object to things, or so I don't really know. I'm definitely not a law expert by any means, so I don't know the realism of that in terms of how much would be allowed, the discretion of what the witness is saying like that. Even in Jim's testimony, because he said a lot of things that were not necessarily part of the actual testimony of the facts of what happened. And I don't know how much leeway they give when it comes to witnesses testifying to the grand jury, because I've never really studied that many.
No, I just mean like Pembleton's own. His own actions were unprofessional in that instance, because he was like doing an N thing. He was like saying, he obviously saw. I mean, in any language, if someone's got a gun and you're not going to go towards them, and you see the expression on their face. And it says, maybe perhaps he thought it was a joke. That's a bit of a stretch.
Well,
to then say, I adamantly believe that he thought it was a joke.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess he was choosing to believe the friend rather than the other side of it, thinking the prejudices of Jim and even his wife were coloring their view of what happened. So yeah, he was most definitely. Again, the episode showing Pembleton's biases as well.
Yeah,
and his jumping the gun or jumping to the conclusion that he felt was justified under the circumstance, and probably kind of thinking about a lot of personal towards people that were racist in his mind. So, in a sense, part of what Bayliss says is accurate, and that he's talking about the other side of it, of a prejudice on the part of, and he alleges G as well, although I think he has less justification for that. But I think there was some truth to that. He took it too far. I think Pembleton goes on like a crusade to bring down everybody he thinks is a racist. But it definitely colored, no pun intended, his view on this case. Part of the greatness and uncomfortableness of the episode, discomfort, I guess that's the right word, is the fact that nobody gets off scot-free. They don't paint anybody as being. Everybody has their own prejudices and biases that they're all dealing with, and so there's nobody who's truly objective about it. I mean, the closest one is probably Danvers. He has to make the judgment, but even he, his agenda is, he says, the district attorney's office to look racist by not bringing this guy before the grand jury. So he still has his agenda. It's not necessarily his own personal prejudices. It's more of an image thing.
What I found disturbing was none of the race aspect, but the fact that it's a relatable situation that I could be in. That's what I found disturbing, and that's why I can find things like this more disturbing than science fiction, which
particular situation?
Would it being a homeowner and shooting a burglar?
So do you have a gun, Ben?
I'm not saying.
You're gonna take your Fifth Amendment rights, even though you don't have the Fifth Amendment over there. All right, so, well, I know it's tough to say. Again, it's a hypothetical. Like, if you're in that situation, if you had somebody who showed up at your door, wearing makeup and saying a bunch of weird stuff. I mean, because the question they asked, do you think you would shut the door and call the police, or how would you?
Oh yeah, they're going to arrive in 20 seconds. Yeah. What he could have done is a warning shot.
True.
But as we've seen from the previous episodes, that the bullet that goes up can sometimes come down and hit someone. So
yeah, well, and I would look at it. I looked at it, what I'm thinking, because something somewhat similar has happened to me. I don't have a gun, and I put the risk out there for anybody who's watching this video who knows where I live. They would try to come in, since I just said I don't have a gun. However, I do have plenty of objects. And there was a time where there was a guy who was trying to get in my front door. Now and was banging on it and trying the doorknob. And when he wasn't successful, he tried going over and banging on the window. The window, it's sort of a sliding door on the balcony of my apartment. And my guess is the dude was drunk, and it was like 3:30 in the morning, and he didn't know what apartment he was going into, and thought that this was his, or at least he knew where he was going in, but he couldn't get in. But as this is happening, he woke me up at 3:30 in the morning, and I'm preparing myself. I'm looking around the room thinking, what can I pick up that if this guy the window, that I can hit him with something if I have to, Didn't actually come in. So the way I'm thinking is that in the situation that happened in the episode, is if once he had closed the door on him the first time, and he continued to bang on the door, that he should have called the police. So there's a guy trying to get in my house. He won't go away. And if he actually or if he broke the door or something, that's the point at which I would say he's justified in using the gun, because if he's fearing for his his life, his wife and kids, whatever. But things up to that point, he's a threat, but he hasn't reached that level of where he becomes a deadly threat when all he's doing is banging on the door and making noise. So that's the point at which I thought, the police aren't going to be there in 20 seconds, but you still call them at that point and tell them, look, this guy's trying to get in, he won't go away, he keeps making noise, he's banging on the door, and you never know, there could have been somebody in close enough vicinity that they would get there in not too much time, and the neighbors might have at that point heard what was going on and called something in too, so you have some corroboration there too.
But one thing could be is not asking him why did he call the police. Why didn't the wife call the police while he was dealing with him?
Well, right, that's another, that's and I don't remember if they addressed that, I don't remember them specifically asking her why she didn't, or if she did, because they don't actually say at what point the police were called, if I remember right. I remember they asked Jim, why didn't he call the police after he And I thought that was a legit question. And I understand the fear aspect of it, but at that point, you still have the power in the sense that he's not actually in your house. He's outside the door. And like I was saying, in the situation I was in, the guy didn't get in my door. He was just trying ways of getting in. So was to look for something to hit him with, but it wasn't because I was, that I was trying to hurt the guy. It would just be, I thought I might have to defend myself. But if he actually further, then, my next step probably would have been to try to call the police, but I didn't know what he was going to do. So that's the thing is that at that time, and it was only me here. That's another thing is, the situation was different. They had young children in the place. If this happened 10 years ago and Morgan was still, a little kid, my reaction might have been more swift in terms of calling the police faster if I thought somebody was actually, breaking in and was a threat to Morgan, even beyond myself. So the attitude changes when I think about, there's young kids in the house.
Yeah. Well, I like the next one more. So I don't know what to give this one, because it's one of those things where it's like, what food don't you like, Jeff? Can you give an example of an item of food that other people like that you don't?
Onions.
Onions. So someone could say, this is a 10 out of 10 onion. And you would say, yeah, I don't like onions. Yeah, but it's really, really good. I don't like onions. So a little bit like that with this, where it's like, it's not my cup of tea, but it's well done, not my cup of tea, I suppose. And the acting was very good.
What I've always said is, to me, the only way to do it when it comes to ratings is to say, what was your overall enjoyment level? Because then that accounts for, you can say, well, because I can even say about this episode, it is somewhat disturbing to me. It makes me uncomfortable. But like you said, it's very well done in what it is. I can still find some flaws in it. It does a good job. To me, it never strayed beyond the credibility level in terms of how the characters act. I found really the question that I was left with at the end of the episode was, would Bayliss have been than it appears that he was for breaking the glass in the box? Would he have been actually suspended? In fact, even before that happened, when G told him to get out of there, would he have said, basically don't come back until I tell you, because I want to get this case done without you interfering in it. And then once he broke the glass, I would think he's not going to be back in the squad room for a while. That should have been like an automatic suspension or something. So, and they don't really address that.
Well, but you see, the thing is, to me, that's plausible, because all the while we get what the ramifications are when you're down a member of the squad.
True. I know that they obviously they value having somebody there, having a warm body, as they say sometimes. In my business, in the restaurant business, when you're talking about, running a restaurant and you have limited staff, and then you're down people, when you're hiring people, sometimes people's standards could be because they simply don't want to have to work open to close shifts, and they need somebody there. So yeah, obviously that factors in, but I still think that I think that wasn't handled well in the fact that in the next episode there's absolutely no mention of, like, they do mention the tension between Bayliss and Pembleton, but they don't say anything about any kind of disciplinary action on Bayliss for the way he behaved. And I think it warranted at least one, even if it was a brief scene, of G coming down on Bayliss for that and saying, this basically isn't going to happen again if you want to continue to be a detective in the squad,
Oh yeah,
because we can't have this stuff going on if we're, if another member of your family has something happen to him, we have to know you're not going to act this way. So, so everybody has to be on the same page.
I would have put something about, well, I wouldn't suspend Bayliss, but he's paying for a new mirror. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and there could have been something about docking his paycheck for that or something. And because they talked about some of the ramifications when Lewis, had the car accident in a previous episode. where he actually injured Bayliss, but there wasn't anything.
Yeah, because
and I realized, they were trying to fit a lot in this episode, and there may have been scenes that were cut for time, so I give them the benefit of the doubt. But my rating of this one, I would give it an 8 out of 10, because I think it's very effective for what it is. The fact that it does disturb me in some ways brings it down from a 10 in my mind. And probably without that, it still might have been a 9. And I thought, David Morse did a really good job in the main guest role of Jim Bayliss. I think.
Yeah, did. I'll give him 10 out of 10.
Very convincing to me. Yeah.
10 out of 10. In that you forgot it was an actor.
Was believable.
It's one of these times you forget someone's acting.
To me, is the beauty of Homicide is almost all the time they got really good guest actors, and because of that, the few times that they don't, it stands out, which is why one of the reasons I railed on that on the episode called Partners, that they open the show with this scene where you've got the new guy Jones and this informant or guy who's, I'm like, they couldn't get a better actor for this scene. So the whole thing came off kind of fake to begin that episode, and to me it ruined the tone of the episode. But this episode certainly can't accuse of being let down by the acting in any way. I think.
Is that Danvers?
It's simply
right. Because I was thinking, who else could it be?
The name, right?
yeah, because that's about Tim Bayliss. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I was thinking, who the hell could that be? And I've seen his name before. I wonder if it's Danvers.
Yes, that is Danvers. Yes, Jelko is actually how you pronounce his first name.
Oh, right.
Yep. Eastern European of some kind, I guess Polish maybe. But anyway, so.
Right then, so we can, I don't know.
Yeah, another thing I thought was really good, like the reason I rate it as highly as I do is, again, because of all the things very effective about it, even besides the acting and the way that the tensions and the biases are brought up. There's a lot of, the director made some good choices when it came to some of the shots and the way that they chose to do that. And I liked the flashbacks, because they hadn't really done that up to this point.
Well,
had to do the crime like that.
Well, really, if you're doing a flashback, it should be point of view. Don't do it like that.
Well, okay, I'm not saying it's 100% realistic. I'm just saying I liked that they chose to do it in that style.
Right.
It's effective for what it was in the episode, and I like. And there have been other shows I've seen do that, but that was the first time I remember Homicide doing it. Because usually, they always said they're not about they weren't about the action, they're about what happens after the crime. So they didn't have a whole lot of that. You would have pictures of, obviously the victim and things around the place, but you didn't have that, action of what occurred. So I liked that aspect of it.
I think it might be an NT thing where it's like, oh, sigh, another discussion about race. Can't we talk about something interesting like economics? Rather than these things that go round and round and round and round and round that NS love to talk about.
Yeah, well, the thing is, to me, the thing that keeps it from being, for me, from having that feeling is when it's done in a way where the perspectives of the characters are believable. When, like I said, when it just comes off as, oh, we're going to have this special episode.
Oh, that's the worst.
On, and they'll have like the token evil white guy that hates everybody. And because when you do that, then the entire episode is just focused on that guy. You're like, this guy's evil. And if everybody from the start believes that, then there's no real tension or suspense to it, because it's just you're set up to think this guy's evil and he's doing evil things, and it doesn't really matter why. And so it is a trite kind of discussion on the matter, because it doesn't lead anywhere. It just leads. Yeah. It just makes a focal point of one person.
Yeah, and that is,
or even a group of people.
And that's the type of story that was done a lot in American. It would make really black and white.
Why this is better is that it didn't do that. It made, and they weren't afraid to have Pembleton come off as being somewhat self-righteous and convinced of things that he didn't necessarily have a right to be 100% convinced of.
Oh yeah, I mean, and as you know, Tubby, what's that guy's name? The ISTP fellow who's always like needling him, teasing him about that.
Felton?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked, another thing I liked was in the opening bit when Bolander was talking about the green thing, and Pembleton goes through how the reason he chose Bolander was because he's not going to be the guy that drives him crazy with the philosophizing and everything. They're basically like, hey, you're the ISTJ. Why are you the one that's yammering on about what really is the color green? Like, so I thought that was pretty good.
Oh, and then with well, you know, they can go a bit weird. But yeah, I think it showed with. Do you think now? Just to talk about typology for a little bit. Well, before that, I'll say S.
Finish the sentence, Ben.
Okay. Right. Okay. Do you think the SI DOMs, ISFJs, ISTJs, are internally a little bit unstable? They try to organize themselves externally, but internally they can be quite dynamic, unstable, and moody.
But he can be. So yes, say can be, but so can anybody else for different reasons, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I haven't seen evidence that they're any more likely to be that way than anybody else. They're just their instability is triggered by different things, maybe, than some other types.
I mean, like that example with where Bayliss, where is it a case where they're the type? Do you think SI DOMs in general will be smooth, and then suddenly they'll crack and overreact, and stuff will come out that they've been hiding in?
Yeah, I certainly think that can happen. Sure. And I think again, another great thing about doing these episodes in order is you see the contrast. And I pointed it out last episode. Anything about what was to come from Bayliss, that Bolander's reaction to a situation where he looked at it as I made a mistake and I did the wrong thing. His criticisms of himself an instability because he had self-doubt of his detective skills and his job. And like I said, I pointed out in the last review, ISTJ's number one thing is fulfilling their duty and their place in whatever it is they're doing. And so when he felt like I'm not as good as I thought I was at this, he had somewhat of an internal crisis over this because this is life on, basically. And in the very next episode, we have Bayliss, obviously a lot younger, and it's not his own personal mistake he's reflecting on, it's his cousin. The things he says to Pembleton are defensive, but they're not as much defensive of himself. And he says things like he's not some smoke hound. So he's differentiating, he's categorizing, look, Frank, this is the way you act in the box with people that are like drug dealers and stuff. And in Bayliss's mind, to say, hey, this is a person who's in the good category as opposed to these people in the bad category. Of course, that doesn't work on Pembleton because he doesn't see people that way. But I don't. So that's an ineffective way of him getting that message on, but it's still very natural for Bayliss to do that because in his mind, everyone is separated into good and bad people.
I think Pembleton categorizes people as racist and not racist.
Well, yeah, he probably does, but he would even still say that a racist, like if Jim Bayliss ended up dead and he was the primary on that, he would still pursue that case, believing that whoever killed him needed to be brought to justice because it doesn't matter that whether he thought, Jim was a racist or not, that he still deserved as any other case. So that's the difference is that Pembleton might be in his mind a racist, but he still doesn't believe that takes away their value as a human being. Whereas Bayliss was actually looking at it as the value of somebody who's some career criminal is less than my cousin because my cousin And so his defense is based on that. And so the instability comes from he's losing control of the situation, feeling like this is this good person who's about to have bad things happen to him, as opposed to a bad person having it happen to him.
The bit where I think Bayliss was outside when Frank was talking all that stuff where he was saying, oh, he thought it was a toy gun, something like that. I would have had Bayliss inside and look and have a reaction to Pembleton saying that kind of stuff. And then had a scene about why are you leading the jury saying things that you don't know to be true? Why are you saying these things about my cousin?
Yeah.
But one thing on type is, do you think that EJR&D once said that SPs, we may have been talking about ESTPs, that their anger is like they can go very angry, but then they cool down and calm down very quickly. So it can come and go very quickly. Do you think it's a lot longer lasting with SJs?
Yes. Yes, I've seen that in person many times, and with people that I wouldn't describe as coming across as, mentally unstable or anything like that, or, that it seemed like very, people that normally are calm, but when they do get pissed off, then yeah, there's a much longer period before they come down with that. And again, it goes back to what I see from SJs is that the thing about liking tradition is not just a matter of, formal things. It can even come across in terms of, if something happens to you, you're supposed to be in a bad mood because of it for a certain period of time. And I'm not even saying that's a conscious thing, like they say, oh, well, I must take one day to recover from such and such. It happens where they feel like if they don't feel a certain way about something for a period of time, for a response to it. They've got like that internal thing of, if I were to just get over this in a few minutes, I would somehow not be giving whatever this was the respect it needed, or somebody would not believe I was truly upset about this, or like there's all these kind of factors that seem to come across.
Right, so sociologists would say that SI types are dynamic sensing types and like internally unstable, and the SE ones are static sensing types, so like they get over it quicker. So, and so I was asking it, would say like who would be the angriest, ESTP or ESTJ? And it's probably, and I think he said ESTJ, the supervisor, would stay angriest the longest. You think that's true?
Could be, yeah.
Of course.
And I think that's the other thing is that SJs tend to, like, there is a bad side of an SJ where it's like you've crossed over and have been recategorized as being a bad person.
Yeah, I've got that in me as well.
And it takes longer to, you have to do something to earn your way back to the good side. Whereas with SPs, I'm not saying it's instantaneous, forgive anything, but I think it is much harder to reach a point with an SP where you basically can't give you any chance again. Like it takes a lot more to have that sort of effect on an SP type, I think.
Interestingly enough, if you see the video with Kristen, she's slightly different in that area where she does talk about where she is judgmental. But she's an ISFP and an Enneagram Type 6. So,
yeah, again, I haven't seen that video when you brought that up.
It's a very good one.
You can be. I'm not saying that SPs can't be judgmental. What I'm saying is that they don't tend to hold grudges as long if it's based on, someone's behavior towards you. That you can still react the same way to the same behavior repeatedly. Sense that, oh, this person has crossed over and been recategorized as a bad person, treat them differently from now on until something changes in that area.
Oh, yeah, I mean, she's young enough that Kristen's probably not had a grudge on someone for over 10 years.
at almost 40, it's a very short list. There is one, but it's very, very short. Like single digits. Count them on one hand of people that I would say that, and even those people, I still don't say are bad people. I just, I can't completely say that because there's anytime they're brought up that those same kind of feelings come back up in me about that person. So I mentioned one in one of the videos I did with you, one of the teachers I had in high school. Anyway.
Oh yeah, and maybe a certain INTJ as well. Right. Well, we can. I don't know what to give that episode. I do like the acting from the main guest star.
Well, you could do what I did when on some of the Leg 7s where I actually came up with 2 scores and then just did the average of them. Because I would rate, like, you know, one way and another part another way, and then I would just split it and do the difference. So
I think I'll give it about a 7.
all right.
Right. So that's goodbye from me, folks.
All right. Now join us next time for a truly unique episode of Homicide, The Gas Man, also the season 3 finale. So.
Sort of new, sort of unique. A little bit of an influence of Tarantino, I reckon. But we'll talk about that next. Bye, folks.